California has become famous for its homeless problem. Yeah, we see this all over the place in California. In fact, it became really prominent when San Francisco, which has been kind of at the epicenter of this particular epidemic, managed to clean everything up almost overnight as soon as the Chinese Communist Party was coming to visit for a trade delegation. But unfortunately did not stay very clean. And so the question is that how big a problem is this, right? How big a problem in California is this for real? And what are some of the causes that lead to homelessness? Because this is a complex issue. We're not saying that it's just one thing or another thing. It's a lot of stuff. And so what we're going to do today is we're actually going to look into what has been going on in California, how much money has been spent, and boy, are you going to want to stick around for that. And we're going to talk about is anyone around the country, because it's not just California, is anywhere around the country actually doing this correctly? Like, has anybody cracked the code on how to effectively deal with homelessness? All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Good Ranchers. Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the producer of producers, is actually not in the studio today, but I am. Hi, I'm here. And of course, we have my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then our resident historian and political prognosticator, Christian.
Doing my best to look homeless today.
You don't even got to try, my friend. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was me.
So bigoted of you.
That was me.
It's okay. My mother has said the same thing. So.
That's because she wants grandbabies, Christian. Like, come on, let's go. All right. So listen, here's the deal. We would like all of you, before we get into the next part of this, to go over to our show notes and check out our community over there in Circle. You can join up for that. A lot of our episodes come from the community, and we certainly like to interact with people there. Plus, we've got some more features that are going to be coming out here later on in the year, and being signed up on our online community is going to be key in order to access those. So let's go ahead and jump into this episode. All right, so first off the bat, right, this is a complex issue. It's not just taking place in California. Let's be honest about this, that whenever you're looking at a state that has a high population, that is relatively wealthy, that has warmer weather, right? You're probably going to have more homeless people that are going to go to some of those areas because it's kind of conducive, right? There's places to panhandle. There's various resources that are available. Again, it doesn't get as cold in the winter. Like, all of these things factor in. And so we don't want to just say, hey, this is all Gavin Newsom's fault, as much as I would like to. But policy also matters, right? The sort of things that you actually put into place matters, not just to address homelessness, but also causing it. And so there's been a lot of easy solutions sometimes offered by the right that probably don't take into consideration all of the relevant factors. There's also been a lot of solutions offered by the left. Here's the thing I would say. I think the left has kind of won the argument when it comes to the policy positions and the funding issues when you look at how much money is being spent in California in order to deal with this. And so, again, we're going to ask the question, what were the promises made? Like, what's the problem? What were the promises made? Hey, if you spend this much money, if you pay this much in taxes, if we set up these programs, this is going to effectively address the issue. And then what were the results, right? And then let's take a look at some of the other policy positions that have been put out there, as well as some of the work that's gone on in the private sector. All right. So first things first, let's go ahead and jump in. And I pulled this up because I thought it was interesting. This is from backpackbed.org. So this is an organization that gives out facts about homelessness and whatnot. And these were some of the national level statistics with respect to homelessness. Go ahead and scroll down. So for those of you who are not watching, basically what they said is in 2023, their stats were that 552,830 Americans are homeless and needlessly suffering tonight. So 1 in every 588 Americans is homeless. 233,832 people will sleep on the streets across the USA tonight. That was according to the Housing and Urban Development 2022 statistics. 18% are chronically homeless. 7% are unaccompanied youth. 7% are veterans, and then said the 10 states with the highest homeless rates account for 55% of the homeless population: California, New York, Florida, Texas, Washington, Massachusetts, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Colorado. And so, again, you're going to notice some interesting things about that, right? Because you got states like Florida and Texas. Again, Florida and Texas, large populations, warmer states, that kind of makes sense. Maybe you could claim the same about California. New York, large population. But when you get into places like Washington, Massachusetts, Oregon, like that gets a little bit more confusing to me. That's
Illinois.
I can't. Yeah, Illinois is another one. Colorado. These are ones that it's a little bit harder for me to just look at them and say, okay, higher population, because Illinois got a high population. Colorado, Oregon, kind of mid-tier. Oregon does not have a massive.
They're very sparse, actually.
Yeah, Massachusetts, not especially. Washington, not especially. I mean, obviously they're more populated than places like Idaho or Montana or Wyoming.
Well, it's mostly the big cities within those places.
Well, and
I mean, when you're looking at Illinois, it's Chicago.
Yeah.
It's not rural Illinois.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's something. I live in Culpeper, Virginia, right? We're a very, very rural community. There's a little over 50,000 people in the entire county. And yes, we have homeless people in the county, but it's not overwhelming. It's not like we have tent cities.
Right. And there are places where, at least climate wise, it's a little more conducive to outside living.
Yeah.
And so some of those places you could look at it and kind of go, well, man, if
you could live outside year round in Hawaii.
You could.
Right? You could live outside year round in California. You're just not, I mean, the heat
without the threat of freezing to death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, we're not saying it's ideal or anything like that.
No.
We're not being insensitive toward it. We're just saying that
it's just some climates are more conducive to
it
than others.
If you found yourself homeless, would you rather live in Miami or Saskatchewan? Right.
Right. And that's why Chicago, I mean, that is, if you're sleeping on the street in Chicago in the winter, you might not make it.
Yeah. You could freeze to death.
The quiet part that needs to be said in all this is there's obviously a trend line here when you look at the states. And somebody will say, oh, but the two exceptions, Florida and Texas, they're red states. Yes, they are. They're red states that are wealthy, extremely densely populated. You're talking about the second and third largest states in the country. Texas is the second largest behind California. And then Florida is number 3 in terms of population. Florida's surpassed New York a few years ago in population size. And so, they're the outliers here, but the rest of these states are blue states. California's a blue state. New York, blue state. Washington, blue state. Massachusetts, Oregon, with the exception of Pennsylvania, Illinois and Colorado are also blue states. Pennsylvania's a swing state. But let's be honest, I really doubt that there's a lot of homeless people in, Center County or, Carbon County in Pennsylvania. Like they're probably in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Right. And there are blue cities everywhere.
Yeah.
Maybe Harrisburg, right? But outside of those two main metro areas, there are probably not as many homeless people in the rest of the state. And again, with the exception of Pennsylvania, Florida, and Texas, every single one of these states, solid blue state with a Democratic governor, Democratic Senate, Democratic House, and have been controlled by a trifecta of Democrats in the state capitol for, in some cases, decades. Mm-hmm. Oregon hasn't elected a Republican governor in something like 40 years. Mm-hmm. And so, the reason I'm saying this is because this is the quiet part that needs to be said out loud. Somebody would look at this and be like, oh, but see, Florida and Texas have homeless people too. Yeah, shocker, the two largest states in the country have a significant number of homeless people. But why is it that New York, which is colder and has fewer people than Florida, have more homeless people than Florida does? The weather's not conducive to a large homeless population. Why is Oregon, Massachusetts, and Washington State have more? Why do those states have more homeless people than Tennessee, which is a warmer climate and has the same number of people? Tennessee has the same population as Massachusetts. Why does Massachusetts have a homeless crisis and Tennessee doesn't?
I think the other thing that you have to take into consideration here, especially when you look at places like Texas, Florida not quite as much, but there's still an issue there. Texas has massive illegal immigration. Right. So presumably some of the people that are experiencing homelessness in Texas are probably people that are coming over the border with nothing. Right. They don't have resources. You could say the same thing about California. The difference is Texas is trying to do something about it. And California is just, for the last 20 years has done the opposite. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but the blue states don't get to say, oh, well, no, this is just a problem. This is just, this. We're going to get to some of the common misconceptions that they say are misconceptions that actually aren't later. But
especially when you get into, if you narrow it down even further to the cities, pretty much, I'm not sure. Look at all the blue cities. So every red state still has blue cities. You look at Austin, right? And you go, where are all the homeless? Well, they're mostly in the blue cities.
Well, and again, they're going to claim that, well, that's because you got higher population centers. So of course you're going to, okay, but why of course, right? That's the first question.
Yeah.
Why of course? You might have more, but why is this? There's a difference between, hey, we have a higher, number of people that are homeless. There's a difference between that and we have homeless encampments within the city. I remember being at an event speaking in Austin, and somebody got up to ask that question, like, what do you do about the home? And this was kind of like a more libertarian group, right? So there's this question of, well, do people do they have the right to, make use of public spaces in order to live or things like that? And it was like, well, wait a second. If you're all paying taxes, put aside for a sec philosophically what you think about taxes, right? If you're all paying taxes for public walkways, and those public walkways are for public walking, not for setting up an encampment, well then yes, all the people that paid the taxes, to include the business owners or the storefronts on that sidewalk, do have a reasonable expectation that people are not going to be living in a place that they were never meant to live. So that causes a problem, especially when you got a city instituting policies, which is allowing for it, and then calling anybody that has a problem with it a bigot. But let's jump in. Before we get into the whole policy thing, I want to get into California specifically, right? So we got this next one that we came up here. This is crisishouse.org, and they have California homeless statistics. This is 2022. But they said the count on homelessness in California, the most recent since the start of the coronavirus pandemic, found that approximately 173,800 people are without stable housing in the state. The numbers show an increase since 2019, even with proactive measures like eviction moratoria, rental assistance, and stimulus checks. We're going to get into this because what they just said here when we get into the policy side is very, very important, because they always assume, like, we did all these things, and even after we did them, the problem's getting worse. Never once do they think, oh, maybe some of these things are adding to the problem. Like that never even crosses their mind. It's always, well, we hit this thing as hard as we could with this hammer we have, and it's not working. What we need is a bigger hammer. All right. The numbers show an increase. Okay, there we go. Furthermore, trends indicate that Latino homelessness is growing disproportionately. I love it when they say things like it's growing disproportionately to what? Well, to whites and Asians. Okay. Do you have tens of thousands of whites and Asians crossing the southern? You're actually starting to get more Chinese crossing the southern border now. But when this was done, like, do you have tens of thousands of Swedes crossing the southern border from Mexico into California? No. Okay. It's primarily Latinos. Okay. So it may be disproportionate to whites, or maybe disproportionate to another ethnic group that is not crossing the border in record numbers. But to put that out there, like, gosh, why is this happening? Do you think it might be this? Do you think it might be the border problem? Do you think that might be contributing to the disproportionate? Like, again, they just throw things out there with,
They had to throw that out there for the virtue signaling,
yes,
of course, right? Whenever it's all about disparate impacts, right? Which is really funny, because how do you measure a disparate impact? Well, it totally depends on who's measuring it and what they want to pull out of the data. It's what's the quote? Is it a Mark Twain quote that, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics?
Yeah.
Anybody who has worked in electoral politics, or who has worked in any sort of job that involves statistics, like marketing, or even for like a corporation, you can twist numbers however you want in order to paint whatever picture it is that you want. It's once you've done it enough, it kind of becomes a habit. So, or it becomes, secondhand. It's really easy to do. But what I find fascinating about this is, like, they had to throw in the whole, the Latino number is growing disproportionately. Like, yeah. If the white number had been growing disproportionately, I guarantee you they wouldn't have added that in there.
No,
they needed to add this in there because they needed to say, see, this is systemic racism. It's all part of the progressive omni-cause, right? The homeless crisis has everything to do with trans rights in Gaza.
Yeah, because
like what this is saying is it's a proclaim of, look at how virtuous I am. Look, I'm a good person because I'm addressing, I'm bringing up this fact, this statistic here, but. No, there's a lot that's missing here. I'm really curious. I can't wait for us to get to the whole what might be causing this problem, because some of the things that they listed here are, spoiler alert, actually contributing to the problem when they mention things like eviction moratorium.
Yes.
and rental assistance, which that's basically, I'm assuming they're referring to rent controls.
Yeah.
When they say that, and then obviously the stimulus check problem.
So this article kind of goes on. If you scroll down here, there's homelessness in San Diego. Once again, they say 2022 saw an increase in families experiencing homelessness, up 56% from 2020. So again, 2 years after the pandemic. So this is increasing. Black San Diegans, who make up under 5% of the total population in San Diego County, made up 24% of the region's unsheltered homeless population, while 24% of San Diegans experiencing homelessness were over 55 in both 2020 and 2022. This year's count showed 47% of those seniors were experiencing homelessness for the first time, with 57% having a physical disability. And again, we picked, and part of the reason why I wanted to look at San Diego here too is because San Francisco has become the use case, but we also want to demonstrate that this is happening. There's a problem all over California. Now, this is the part I want to get to next. So if you look at this next article, this is from breaktime.org. And I wanted to point this out because it's honestly, it's frustrating to me. All right. So this is written by someone named Jimena Chavez, Breaking Apart Homelessness, Misconceptions, the Real Facts About Homelessness in America. And so this is another one of these things where I look at this sometimes and I wonder, do you really want to help the homeless, or is your 501c3 just making a crap ton of money off of the homelessness industry? Because there actually is an industry surrounding this, and we're going to get to the numbers that actually demonstrate this later on. But this is where I want you to listen very carefully to what they describe as a misconception, and then listen to their explanation. So, misconception number 1, the most common misconception surrounding people experiencing homeless. Let me stop. Just so everyone's aware, like, I've had friends that have experienced homelessness. I've had friends that I've tried to help that have experienced homelessness. So when I get frustrated by this, I want someone to understand this is not me looking at everybody that struggled with homelessness and saying like, you're the problem or it's all your fault or whatever it is. That's not what this is. This is about properly diagnosing a problem so that we can actually get to relevant solutions that will work, not just keep certain organizations flush with government dollars. So I want you to properly place where my frustration is as I explain some of this, because I'm going to get a little bit sarcastic here. All right. Misconception number 1, the most common misconception surrounding people experiencing homelessness is that their experience is a result of their own choices. Societal views on homelessness incorrectly assume one's experience is an inevitable consequence of poor decision making. They go on to explain, this is a highly harmful misconception and implies that those experiencing homelessness aren't worthy of support, promoting the general public to normalize discrimination and exclusion when interacting with them. People experiencing homelessness in turn internalize the blame placed upon them, exacerbating the negative effects of stigma on their self-esteem and well-being. This misconception is also blatantly incorrect. Many people, many people? I thought your original misconception is that it was most people. No. Many people experience homelessness for reasons that are not within their control, including loss of job from economic downturn, car troubles, medical conditions or disabilities, family neglect or abuse, or family emergencies. Further, economic issues such as the lack of affordable housing, poverty, lack of employment opportunities, and low wages also contribute to homelessness. So you're already starting to see, right? The misconception was the most common misconception surrounding people experiencing homelessness is that their experience is a result of their own choices. That was the misconception, that they're going to tear apart and destroy, right? They're going to show you how wrong it is for you to think that way. And then they immediately go into saying, well, this misconception causes people that are homeless to internalize the blame, to look at their own self and their own decisions and feel bad about which is bad for their emotional well-being, right? And bad for their mental well-being. And obviously, if you think that someone's decisions might have something to do with the situation they've ended up in, then you must believe that there should be no help for them whatsoever. Right? Do you see what they did in their initial argument? That is not an intellectually honest argument. They set up a misconception without even giving you any evidence for why that is a misconception. Then they immediately go into, and because of this misconception, all of these bad things. And then when they say it's also blatantly incorrect, they provide no statistics, no evidence whatsoever to actually prove that that is a misconception or that it's incorrect. Now, I have a very good friend. Him and his wife, his family, they worked in homeless ministry in Virginia for years. Right? And they would go out regularly to large homeless encampments in Prince William County. And so I'm reading through this and I'm asking them, like, hey, how many people would you say, like, when you looked at all the people that you interacted with that were homeless, that were living in this encampment, how many that you interacted with were there in some part, significantly in some part as a result of their actions? And he goes, all of them. Okay, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, you had a lot of people on the sex offender registry list. You had a lot of other people that were dealing with substance abuse, primarily alcoholism. But this idea that there were a bunch of people that were living in a homeless encampment in Prince William, Virginia, as a result of none of their decisions, stuff just happened to them, because that's not what I saw, right? He's not suggesting that his experience extrapolated out to everywhere, but from his rather relevant experience, that was not the case, right? Not to mention the fact that, again, the people I know that have fought with homelessness, it was absolutely a result of their actions. Now, there might have been other things that took place that contributed it to some things out of their control, some things within their control. But again, I've known people that experienced similar things, whether it was divorce, whether it was losing a job, whether it was X, Y, or Z, that didn't end up homeless. However, I know other people that ended up homeless. They broke the law. They got in trouble. They got put in jail. Right? They got let out. They have difficulty finding someone that would rent to them. They had difficulty finding someone a job. So even if you're looking at it, it's like, well, okay, well, he's not homeless. He's only homeless because he can't seem to get a job. He can't get hired. Why? He's a convicted felon. Right? So yeah, the property owner might not want to rent. Now, does that mean like these people are unworthy of support or help? Or absolutely not. I definitely want them to be able to get help and support. But to start this off, this really pisses me off, because what this is to me is enabling. This is someone telling, oh, no, it's not your fault. You have nothing to do with your circumstances. None of it can be attributed to choices that you've made or actions that you've taken or people that you might have hurt. None of it. It's all society. It's all because we don't have the right policies in place. It's all because you haven't been given things that you deserve. None of it's your fault. Well, if none of it's a result of your decisions, then theoretically you might come to the conclusion that I can't do anything about it. The world's just arrayed against me. Everything's bad. It's all. Do you think that helps anybody? Do you honestly think it helps someone to constantly tell them, no, has nothing to do with decisions you've made?
It does help. It does help people. It helps the NGOs that are using this as a grift, and I'm going to call it a grift because it is. This is a consistent problem regardless of the issue. Homelessness is the one that we're talking about today, but it exists in so many other areas where NGOs will. I'm going to use the term again, the progressive omnicause. You have all of these NGOs, they get involved in an issue, they monopolize all of the government, funds that are flowing towards trying to address the issue, and instead they use it as a mechanism in order to enrich themselves, but also to push an agenda. So that's the first group that it helps. The second group that it helps is the politicians.
Yeah.
And not all of them, though. Only the Democratic politicians. It doesn't help Republican politicians. It helps Democratic politicians. Why? Because they get to virtue signal about how great of a person they are. Yeah. Oh, look at all this money that we spent to address this problem. We're courageous and kind and caring and tolerant. And
stunning and brave.
Stunning and brave, yeah. It helps them with virtue signaling. But it also helps them when it comes to funneling money to their own voting base.
Yes.
Because what do most of these NGOs do? They go out there and they hire activists that are going to go and campaign and donate to the very politicians that are pushing this grift, is ultimately what it is. I asked earlier, why does Massachusetts have a larger homeless problem than Tennessee? It's because Massachusetts is run by Democrats. Mm-hmm. Tennessee is not. It is as simple as that. But stating that is saying the quiet part out loud. It's to declare that the emperor has no clothes. And you're not allowed to say that because you're a mean person. You're a bad person if you say that.
Yeah.
But part of the reason that we're in this mess in the first place is because we've been subconsciously told, in some cases literally told, we've been subtly and not so subtly told that you're not allowed to say things like this. You're not allowed to point these things out. It is left-wing policies. It is Democratic governors, it's Democratic state legislatures, and it's Democratic courts that have enabled this problem in certain states. And then when people say, but what about Texas and Florida? Yes. What about the two largest states and some of the warmest weathers in the country? Of course, they're going to have a homeless problem. The question that we need to be asking is, why does Illinois have a homeless crisis? Why does Washington State have a homeless crisis? Why doesn't Tennessee have one? Why doesn't Alabama have one? Why doesn't Georgia have one? The reason why is because those states, at least yet, haven't been overrun with a bunch of left-wing grifters in office and out of office that are using basically a revolving door of government slush funds in order to enable their own voting base to weaponize compassion and tolerance and acceptance and kindness in a political manner that enriches themselves and gets their buddies reelected over and over again.
Yeah.
That's why we have this crisis.
One interesting thing I just wanted to point out, because people become homeless for a lot of different reasons. A few years back, an entire town in Northern California burned to the ground, and about 50 some odd thousand people were displaced. And my parents were part of that. They lost their home, they lost their livelihood, they lost everything. And it was really interesting because a lot of the people who needed the assistance desperately because they lost everything, even all their documents, everything's
in
gone.
a fire that was truly not their fault.
Not their fault. This is the absolute pinnacle of not their fault. And first of all, everybody who already qualified for assistance was first in line to get every possible government benefit that they had voted into, action emergency wise to help these people because they're displaced. There's not enough housing for all of these people.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because there were huge numbers of people from other areas, not from that Northern California area, Paradise, California, who came into the area because they saw a lot of government money coming out and like a lot of,
were very indiscriminately,
private organizations, everything else, setting up camp, helping these people. And I mean, these were people that desperately needed help, and in come thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands into the area from the Bay Area. Some of them might have been coming from Oregon. Some of them, they were coming into the area from these other larger places and getting in line with the fire victims and pretending they were fire victims in order to get whatever they could get out of it. And they set up homeless encampments all around the area that were not, most of them, a huge number of them were not fire victims. So there's a huge transient component here. A lot of times you'll see interviews with homeless, and they'll talk about all the different places that they travel to and the reasons why they travel to those places. And so you have to keep in mind, there's a transient nature to this, and not everybody has good intentions. They just don't.
No. And I think the frustrating part is that, again, what they want to do, what a lot of times these organizations that rely on the government spending for their group, for their cause, whatever it is, they will offer up the person that loses everything in a fire as the model for who they're helping.
Right.
But in reality, it's just not all that discriminating. And look, if you're looking at me going, well, Nick, you're a conservative. Of course you're saying this because you're predisposed to believe this sort of thing, but that's not what's going on. Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks, right? And the Young Turks is about as far left as you get on a lot of these issues. She's been furious about watching what's going on. And we're going to get to some more of that here in a second, but I want to get to, there's a few other misconceptions within this article that I want to tackle. So that first one was this idea that people are homeless because of their own actions. So let's acknowledge right up front that not everyone is homeless as a direct result of something that they did, right? if a young kid runs away from home because they've been horribly abused, not only do we need to help that child, but we need to have a great deal of sympathy for the situation that they find themselves in. If somebody did lose everything as a result of a fire, a natural disaster, or sickness, or whatever it was, and now they are struggling to make ends meet and they don't know what they're going to do next, yes. But the idea that it is a misconception to assume that if somebody is homeless in the United States of America, it has nothing to do with the decisions they've made with their life. I'm sorry, that's ridiculous, and the numbers don't support that. The numbers don't support that. Let's go ahead and talk about misconception number 2. The second most common misconception about people experiencing homelessness presupposes they don't want to work. Similar assumptions argue that people experiencing homelessness are lazy and raise the question, why can't they just get a job? In reality, getting a job is a challenge for most people these days, not only experiencing homelessness. That's interesting because right now we know that there's the actual unemployment rate is fairly low and there's more jobs, available.
This is actually something that the left is trying to run on for the presidential election this year. So I find it really fascinating that partisan hacks on one hand will say things like the economy's doing great, everybody has a job. And then on the other hand, they'll be like, have you tried getting a job? It's impossible. There's no, it's so funny how they will change their tune depending on what the conversation is about.
Yeah, no, again, it's whatever happens to be politically beneficial in the moment. So the idea is that there are jobs out there. Goes, yet it is estimated that again, I wish they'd tell, okay, what's the estimate coming from? I think they got a link here. Estimated that about 43% of people experiencing homelessness are employed. Most of these individuals work minimum wage jobs that barely cover basic living expenses. This is because minimum wage job. This is another misconception this is a real misconception that I really hate. And it's this idea that we just have we have these high percentages of people within the labor market desperately trying to raise a family on minimum wage, when in reality, less than 2% of the overall labor market is actually working at minimum wage. And a plurality of those are people under the age of 25 that are working part-time jobs, going through college, going through school, et cetera. Or they might be working a part-time job in order to supplement income from the main wage earner. They may be an elderly person that is working at like a YMCA as, maybe to supplement Social Security, or maybe just because they want to work there. So this idea that it's just like this horrible thing, and the solution is going to be to raise minimum wage. It's like, if you raise minimum wage, you actually just take away the economic opportunity, because if I'm paying someone that's homeless to do a job, chances are that's not a high-tech field, right? Is it a horrible misconception to assume that if you're homeless, you're probably not working in a high-tech field? Okay. So you're probably doing something that is very, very basic, unskilled labor. That's probably what you're doing. If you raise the minimum wage, I don't say, oh, okay, here's more money. I fire that person because I can't afford to hire them anymore. Many others are underemployed, meaning the hours they are assigned are too few to fund necessary expenses like housing and bills. People experiencing homelessness still work, but wages and/or hours are insufficient for them to secure stable housing. This finding is especially relevant given recent rises in the cost of living around the United States, while wages remain stagnant. Again, another thing that infuriates me is that they are talking about these things as if they just happen in a vacuum, as opposed to understanding that, well, no, the government actively engaged in inflationary monetary policy, which caused the price of everything to go up, right? But something tells me this organization probably supports the same people that want to raise minimum wage, which means it lowers economic opportunity for the people that need it the most, want to increase a bunch of benefits and other mandatory requirements on businesses, which causes them to cut hours because otherwise they can't afford to hire those employees. And elected the politicians that believe inflationary monetary policy is perfectly fine. And then they want to come back and, well, the real problem is they just can't get a job that covers all their expenses. Yes, because of all of the policies that were put in place that made it more expensive.
Right.
The other thing too I think is frustrating here is they're like, well, homeless people are working minimum wage jobs. Okay, why? Why is it difficult for a homeless person to get a job? Well, first of all, usually when you fill out a job application, they do want an address. Right? They do want an address. The other reason why they have a hard time getting a job is because oftentimes they have a record. I'm not saying all the time. I'm not even saying a majority of the time. I'm saying often they have a record. Now, I've seen politicians here in Virginia say that businesses should not be allowed, like it should be illegal for a business to ask whether or not you have a felony. Illegal to ask that question. And the answer is well, because then it prevents people from getting an economic opportunity. Okay, so let me get this straight. You're going to tell somebody that built a business that has, that maybe operating on very, very small margins, that they're not allowed to ask somebody that is going to come into their establishment, have access to their employees, have access to perhaps money or other things of value. You're not allowed to ask, hey, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Maybe for sexual assault, maybe for stealing or burglary or vandalism, like, whatever it is. Nope. They think the solution to this is you shouldn't be allowed to ask.
I've also been really amazed at the number of employers who, as long as they know what it is and they know that you have a record, they're willing to give you a chance. I've watched that with folks that we know before. We have a good friend. I mean, had no problem getting 2 different job offers, pretty decent jobs. Oh yeah, with a record, just came out of jail.
My buddy that, again, fell in some hard times and takes ownership of it too. That's the other thing that's really important here is he didn't get out and say, gosh, society was just so mean to me. He was like, I made stupid decisions and those stupid decisions have consequences and it sucks because now I'm dealing with it, but I'm going to fight through it. And that's what he's doing. And it's sometimes it's an uphill battle. Sometimes days are going good. Sometimes days are going bad. But it's amazing how his mentality is, I've got to get my crap together, right? I've got to do this differently than what I did before. And it has a big impact. But you're absolutely right. We talked to one young business owner actually here in Culpeper. And she had done a lot of work within restaurants and hospitality. And she's saying, I'm telling you right now, she goes, a lot of people within hospitality, especially that work in the kitchens and whatnot, a lot of them will have records. And she goes, and some of them are the best employees you'll ever have because they're grateful for being given an opportunity. And they do. They work incredibly hard. But again, they are making a decision to work hard, to show up on time, to do the right things and take advantage of an opportunity that they've been given in order to build trust and move on from there. But it's, again, misconception one is this has nothing to do with their actual decisions. It's just bad things happened. And then misconception two is they don't want to work. Well, I'm not saying that none of them want to work. I am saying that some of them don't, or that some of them are dealing with substance abuse that is so bad that it doesn't make them a very good employee. It's not good enough to, I want a job. Oh, okay, good. I want to be a thoracic surgeon. No, it's, do you want to do all the things that make you employable? Right? Not good enough to just say, I'm willing to work. What are you willing to do and what can you do? And again, referencing my friend again who worked in this, he was also saying, he goes, Nick, some of them, they don't want to do a minimum wage job because they'll make I think he said that on a bad day, they can make $20 an hour panhandling. On a good day, they can make $100 panhandling. So yeah, that's problematic.
Oh yeah. That's tax-free.
Yeah. All right. Misconception number 3. Have you ever heard a friend say that they look homeless when describing their disheveled appearance? The underlying misconception is that people experiencing housing insecurity all look a certain way. Okay.
I know people who are not homeless, who sometimes look homeless, right?
This is the misconception. This is the you're being mean misconception, right? This is the they're pointing the camera at Christian right now. This is the you're being mean conception. This is all your fault because you're being mean because you're suggesting that homelessness looks a certain way. Okay, can we all just agree logically that not everyone who is homeless is going to look the same way? Can we all agree that certain people, maybe in circumstances that, again, beyond their control and they are absolutely doing their best? But one of the things I don't like is that what they're doing is they're saying that this heuristic is a misconception. Well, a heuristic is basically a mental shortcut that all of us use every single day with just about every decision we make. Why? Because you don't have complete information about everything that you have to make a decision on. I don't have complete information about my car before I stick in the key, turn it over, and start to drive. I don't have complete information when I'm walking down the street and someone is coming toward me. It could be a nice person. It could be a serial killer. I don't know. But there are certain tricks I use in order to determine whether or not it might be a good idea to cross the street with my young child. For instance, if the guy is sitting there slamming his head because he believes demons are chasing him, it could be that he's just practicing for a play. Or it could be that he's bat crap crazy. But here's what I do know. When I have my daughters, I'm holding my daughter's hand and I'm walking, I'm not going to take the time to you know what? I should really investigate this, because making assumptions that this guy is just bat crap crazy because he's screaming in the middle of the street and walking down, when in reality, he could be practicing for a play, right? that's probably not a wise decision on my part. I'm going to go ahead and go with the mental shortcut and say 1% chance he's practicing for a play, 99% chance homeboy's crazy, right? And I'm so tired of people treating all heuristics, you could even use the term stereotypes if you want.
Pattern recognition.
And saying that, any sort of pattern recognition that we don't like is bad and it's racist and it's bigoted and it's mean and it's just a false misconception. Because don't you know that 27% of people that do X, Y, and Z? No, I don't know that. What I do know is that's weird behavior. And I don't know if the weird behavior is going to translate into violent behavior. Because as much as you can statistically show that the weird behavior, studies show that the weird behavior doesn't always manifest itself in violent behavior. Okay, good. You going to take that chance with yourself when you're walking down the street? I mean, I'm sure it makes sense when you're writing articles, but when you're actually in the position and that little heuristic kicks on, what are you doing? And again, it may be very, very convenient for people to kind of sit on their pedestal in their ivory tower and say, well, you shouldn't assume that. No, if it's a safety issue and my kids are there, I'm going to assume that. Why wouldn't I? Because if something bad happens, the first question I'm going to ask is, why didn't you just cross the street? Why'd you do this? Why? Well, I don't want to assume. Shut up, right? Just shut up. I think people are so tired of being guilted into making bad decisions because they don't want to appear mean or intolerant. I don't want to assume.
Yes, this is how we've gotten into this mess. Is I don't want to do the thing that all human beings for all of human history have done, which is act on pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. Because to do so is to be judgmental. And the ultimate cardinal sin in the West is to be judgmental.
Yeah.
Which is really funny that the people telling you don't be judgmental are making a judgment in doing that. But that is how... Honestly, that's how states like California have built entire policies around, let alone social norms. They've legislated that.
Yeah.
It's not enough that it's now taboo for you to be judgmental in any way. It's that, it's now taboo to be judgmental in any way, and therefore we are going to, in force of law, in legislation, codify certain acts or actions in a way based around this assumption that being judgmental is the ultimate sin in the West.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why there's homeless encampments on every street corner in San Francisco. What's really funny is there's not a single politician in San Francisco that campaigned on drugs everywhere, needles everywhere, excrement on the streets everywhere, homeless encampments all over the place, stabbings, murders, Grand Theft Auto, people breaking into cars and stealing stuff. It's gotten to a point where people leave their doors open when they park on the street and they're going inside a store because they know their car's going to get broken into. And that's just the car. Consider the fact that businesses are moving out of the city because they're constantly getting robbed and broken into and ransacked by mostly people that are homeless on a daily basis. And what's funny is there was not a single politician in San Francisco that campaigned on any of those things.
Yeah.
You know what they campaigned on? They campaigned on don't be judgmental.
Yeah.
They campaigned on tolerance and equity and diversity and love and anti-racism and all these other buzzwords that lack any sort of meaning outside of a broader context. Nobody campaigned on any of the on the ongoing disintegration of civilization that's going on in the city. And basically what this means is that the road to hell, yes, it is paved with good intentions. Mm-hmm. And the reason that people operate on things like heuristics is not because everybody wants to be a bigot. It's the same reason that, we have an instinct as humans to avoid snakes.
Yeah.
Not all snakes are poisonous, but you know what? Enough snakes are poisonous that it's not. It would
sometimes
not be,
it's hard to tell the difference.
It would not be wise for you to go out into the woods and just pick up a random snake.
Right.
Well,
humans don't do that for a reason.
Sometimes you have to get up close to even know if it's poisonous or not.
Here's my question. For all the people that are saying that we're not supposed to make any judgments like this, are these the same people that are saying, well, I can't trust any men because some men rape? Oh, okay. So pattern recognition against the entire male population is perfectly appropriate because some men rape. But if you see a homeless person on the side of the road, you're not allowed to assume anything with respect to decisions they might have made or whether or not they could potentially be a threat. You're not allowed to do any of that. but you're allowed to judge the entire male population. Why? And again, it just goes to this idea because this has very, very little to do with actual logical consistency. It has a lot to do with what is politically advantageous in the moment. And you can even see, because the bottom line of this, the bottom paragraph of this misconception 3 is, there is not a single look for homelessness. Nobody has claimed that there is that I'm aware of. Your coworker, your classmate, or the person riding the train next to you every day could all be experiencing this struggle. And using language that promotes stereotypes can lead to implicit bias toward people experiencing homelessness. Implicit biases are incredibly harmful because they affect employment and educational opportunities. They can be challenging to unlearn. Okay, so if your implicit bias towards someone that is homeless is that this is someone that, statistically speaking, is more likely, if I have 2 people to come in to apply for a job, and one of them is homeless and the other is not homeless, okay? Now, statistically speaking, the one that is homeless is far more likely to have either an unstable family life, to potentially have drug issues, to potentially have criminal issues, right? And it doesn't mean that they do, but statistically higher. Is it bad for the business owner to say, okay, well, based off of these probabilities, I'm probably going to go with the safer bet? I would argue, no, it's not bad. Now, if employer says, you know what, I think this person has some skills, I think they have some other things that outweigh those other concerns, and so I'm going to give them a shot. Is that a good thing? Sure. But they don't want to treat it like that's a good thing. That is a good thing to consider. They want to treat it like, no. If you are using common frigging sense, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
All right, misconception number 4. The general public usually stays away from people experiencing homelessness, claiming they are dangerous and violent. People who are facing housing insecurity are not more likely to break the law than a housed person. Bull crap. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. I simply do not buy that.
So they're saying the statistics
they're
are
saying
exactly the same.
Oh yeah, exactly the same. I mean, they don't provide any.
But
they
here's
don't
the
provide
problem.
any, but they say it.
Here's the problem. I've researched to try to find what is the instances of drug and alcohol abuse among housed people, and I can't find that number. All I can find is the number that includes everybody.
Yeah.
You know,
I can't find the homeless or housing insecurity folks. I can't find them outside of the number. They're all in the number.
Can we also say this? Let's use this for an example, because again, we're doing a lot of saying the quiet part out louds on this episode, and we're going to continue to do it. 2 alcoholics. All right, 2 alcoholics. One alcoholic has a job, has a home, maybe has a family. Is it the other alcoholic homeless? Now, you're right that the alcoholism is equally bad, but we can also come to the conclusion that the alcoholism impacts this person very differently than it impacts this person. And you can say the same thing about a lot of various things, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's certain behaviors, whether it's the sort of people that you hang out with, whether it's other motivations and incentives within your life. So it's not that the alcoholism gets any better, but the impacts are significantly worse for this person. Now, what a person does when they actually assume responsibility for their own actions is they say, you know what? I have a problem with alcohol, and that problem is so debilitating that even though it affects that person differently than it affects me, that doesn't mean I can say, well, that person does it, and so therefore I can get away with it as well. That's another part about taking ownership of yourself, your decisions, your environment, and saying, if I can't be around something because the impacts toward me are so different than the impacts towards somebody else, that doesn't take away your responsibility to say, I can't do this the way somebody else can. I can't have it. This person might be able to drink. Maybe they're not an alcoholic. Maybe this person over here drinks at a different rate and it affects them differently. This person over here, they can't help themselves. Once they get past 1 or 2, it's 7 or 8. Does that mean that this person gets to say, well, it's not fair that person can stop at 3 and I can't? No, you just have to modify your behavior. Now they caveat it. And let me read this sentence again. They caveat it. People who are facing housing insecurity are not more likely to break the law than a housed person. They offer no statistics for it, with one exception. Many cities across the United States impose anti-camping laws intended to keep homelessness out of view. The laws vary by city and state, but tend to prohibit sitting, sleeping, storing property, and or living within publicly owned property. In this manner, the system operates to encourage interaction between people experiencing homelessness and the justice system. Living outside, these people can confront citations or arrests for low-level offenses like loitering or sleeping in parks. Such frequent interactions with the justice system will trap people in a homelessness jail cycle, rotating them in and out of jails and emergency public services like shelters, emergency rooms, and detox facilities. Why detox facilities? This cycle does nothing to help people across the housing and services they actually need, such as mental health or substance use treatment. All the while, the cycle only worsens the dangerous stereotypes perpetuated by the general public.
Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of drunken public kind of laws. Yeah. There's a lot of laws that used to be on the books for substance abuse and not just drug dealing, but drug use. And most of these large cities that have a huge number of homeless people have not kept those things as illegal. So they can't scoop into the data, so law breaking implies that you're breaking a law that's on the books. Well, when they have taken certain things off the books and legalized certain things, now that's wiped clean. Now it looks like, see, these people are harmless. You're not really paying attention to the fact that, well, it's legal to do drugs in Portland. It's legal to do drugs on the street in San Francisco. In fact, they'll give you a clean needle if you want it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting if you look at this again. So what are they saying? The problem is not that homeless people are more likely to break the law, even though I think statistically you would have a really, really hard time substantiating that claim. They just assert it here. I don't see anything where they actually prove it. But then they say, well, no, the real problem is that a homeless person is not allowed to camp in a public park, or the homeless person is not allowed to camp outside your store, or the homeless person is not allowed to camp in the parking lot across from your kid's elementary school. That's the real problem. That's what's encouraging interactions with law enforcement. It's like, so let me get this straight.
Well, they gave that caveat without giving any statistics either way on what the offenses really are. I think that's an assumption they're making as a caveat.
I think yes. I think the problem too is it's this idea that, so all of us have to pay taxes for certain public use of public services, whether it's roadways, streets, or public parks, but certain people should get to, but then we should also let people live there. Like, let me get this straight. These are the same people. These are the same politicians, the same people that are constantly pushing more and more new building codes, right? More and more restrictions on what sort of housing you can build, what has to exist, what doesn't have to exist. I mean, we have problems in the United States because the number of stairwells we mandate by law have to be in places like Europe doesn't. Right, so we're not comparing this to the third world. So they'll advocate for all these various restrictions for safety, and then they'll create conditions where it's more difficult to live, find a place to live. It's more expensive. But then they'll say that same person should be able to camp out in the park across the street, as if there's no safety issues or concerns associated with that. And again, it's just incredibly frustrating, and it's always the same thing, right? The problem is not you have no control over your decisions, and anybody that judges you, or anybody that uses pattern recognition, or anybody that uses heuristics before they hire you, or before they let you rent their place, or before they invite you inside, anybody that does that, they're the problem, right? They're the problem. Now, look at this. What can you do to help? Educate yourself. Well, of course, you need to educate yourself by, the more you learn about homelessness and how it is connected to the education, healthcare, foster care, and criminal justice systems, the better understanding you can have to try to end this problem. Advocate. What should I advocate for? Let me only say, for increased local, state, and federal funding to create job opportunities for people disconnected from school or work. Reflect on biases you or your institution might hold about people experiencing homelessness and employment. Challenge stigmas and misconceptions that you may hear in your networks and encourage people to do more research. Do not invalidate the experiences of others or judge others based on their appearance, especially in the context of homelessness. I like this point number 2, advocate for increased local and state and federal funding. Let me just scroll down here to the bottom of the page, and it turns out that, Break Time United Inc. All donations are tax deductible. So it's a 501c3 that gets money to combat homelessness. I wonder how good a job they're doing at solving it. The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I think this is the worst kind of cope. This is the worst kind of cope. This is the idea that we're just going to tell you that, hey, all of those things that you've experienced or that you've witnessed or that you've seen or that you understand about this, all of them are wrong. Trust us. We're the people getting paid to deal with this. And really what you need to be doing is advocating for organizations like ours to get more money. That's what you really need to do, because we're the ones that are going to deal with this. Now, when you look at this other organization, backonmyfeet.org, I think it's interesting because I typed in, I wanted to say, what are the causes of homelessness? So they talk about economic instability. A 2021 study by the University of Chicago estimated that 53% of people living in homeless shelters and 40% of unsheltered people were employed either full-time or part-time. I think that's interesting. I haven't had time to look into that study yet. The economic hardships faced by homeless populations are not independent of the scarcity of affordable housing options. The Coalition for Homelessness reports that an individual would need to earn $45 an hour, 3 times the minimum wage at a full-time job to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at the fair market rent in New York City. So again, what's interesting here is the fair market rent. They're also talking, they keep referring back to minimum wage. Okay, well, look, minimum wage is not going to cut it for you in New York City. Like, is anybody confused about this? Do they think it should? And how do they propose to do that? How do they propose to make that a reality? First of all, I'd like to know how many places are actually paying minimum wage in New York City. Secondly, it's this assumption that, well, because minimum wage is so low and it can't afford you an apartment in New York City, I guess there's just nothing that can be done. You could move from New York City.
Yeah.
You could say, gosh,
people move for work all the time.
I am currently in a location for which my labor will not earn me enough to afford an apartment. I guess all of the policy for the city or state should change in order to accommodate my geographical preference. No, that's the reality. I had somebody tell me once, that's horrible. I said, okay, well then let me ask you a question. How much money should we take from other people in order to subsidize the geographical presence of or preference of this person? Because that's what you're doing. Now, if your altruistic self would like to personally cough up the money to pay for that person's rent, I have no problem with that. I think you should be free to do that. And you should be absolutely free to subsidize that person. But that's not what you want to do. You want to take money from other people that are working really, really hard to try to make ends meet to afford their living accommodations, regardless of where they live in the state. And you want to give it to somebody in order to foster their geographical preference. Well, they're homeless. They can't afford. No. Wait a second. If they can actually get to a different location that provides more, like lower housing costs, and the sort of work that they can do, the sort of labor can do, makes it more economically viable for them to live there, them going to that location makes sense. Because as you pointed out, people move all the time for work.
Yeah, we did multiple times.
Okay, so what's another? So obviously the economic side, I think that's one that we all kind of, we understand that's an issue. The problem is again, they say to things like, in addition to low wages and lack of affordable housing, unemployment can make individuals and families susceptible to homelessness. One such example is Back on My Feet alum Dexter, who immigrated to the U.S. to escape persecution and then became injured on a job site, leaving him unable to work or afford rent. Another example is Myrna, who lost everything due to a divorce and the expenses incurred by having 3 children with disabilities. Can I just say something right here? There's a couple things in here that I find interesting, right? Again, if you look at the person, it's always somebody got hurt on a job site, or somebody got divorced and left with the expenses incurred by having 3 children with disabilities. You're honestly telling me, like, I'm sorry, I'm a legislator. I know the programs that are available for all of this. This idea that when something like this happens, people are just fed to the wolves and there's nothing available for them. It's not true. It is not true. So what's the next one? Substance abuse. Substance abuse is a complex issue, often intertwined with homelessness. The National Coalition for Homeless states that 38% of homeless people were dependent on alcohol and 25% abused other drugs. Mental health challenges, like substance abuse, mental health problems can contribute to homelessness or arise because of homelessness. According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, on a given night in 2022, 21% of the homeless population reported having a serious mental illness. Family and relationship conflicts, breakdowns within families and relationships can also precipitate homelessness. Doubling up or sharing housing with other non-related families is one circumstance that can lead to such interpersonal conflicts. And then they have things like societal barriers and limited access to services. Some individuals find themselves homeless due to a lack of access to essential services, including healthcare, mental health treatment, and addiction support. The absence of affordable or readily available services hampers their ability to address the underlying issues that fuel homelessness. So again, what's the solution? The solution is more programs. The solution is more programs. Oh my gosh.
I mean, just reading this, it's obvious the ideological bent. We have not done enough to talk about the link between left-wing policies and NGO grifting and how it's used as a patronage network for left-wing activists, where you're funneling taxpayer money to the very activist class that then pushes for more money to be funneled to them. And it's all, again, it's all under the guise of compassion. It's all under the guise of not being judgmental, of pushing back against stereotypes or pushing back against bigotry or racism or sexism or any other ism that's out there. And remember when I said earlier that, like, I guarantee you this is going to be somehow connected to the left-wing omni-cause, that there's going to be, it's going to be like, homelessness is a, trans rights issue. Well, here it is, right? I mean, of course, they have to bring it up in here. Under the family and relationship conflicts that then talk about LGBTQIA+. We're starting to go full Canada here. We're adding letters to the alphabet. LGBTQIA+ youth and adults are often a target of domestic violence and abuse as well. Who's abusing them? That's an unwelcomed question for many people, but it's one that I think needs to be asked. And then it goes on to say, the Bureau of Justice Statistics show that, quote, the rate of violent victimization of lesbian and gay persons was more than 2 times the rate for straight persons. Who's abusing them?
Because one of the details people never like within crime statistics is that oftentimes people are being abused within the groups that they occupy. Like there's not a great deal of crime crossover when it comes to like race. And again, it's one of those things they don't want to hear. They want to hear that, well, these people are disproportionately affected. Okay. Before you tell me who the victim is, I want you to also, or when you tell me who the victim is, I also want you to tell me who the perpetrator is. Because something tells me that half of the statistic is not going to be as conducive to your overall narrative. Let's look at another article here. I want to bring this one up. This is Gavin Newsom, who vowed a 10-year strategy. Gavin Newsom intends to aggressively make homelessness his administration's #1 priority, and his first moves will include creating a 10-year plan for ending chronic homelessness and going after tens of millions of new dollars in federal funding. In an interview with the Chronicle,
2003. Oh,
thanks for giving it away. Thanks for getting it away. I was setting up the punchline, and Christian's like, "Hey Nick, did you know this was 2003?" I did. I did know it was 2003. I was going to reveal that in just a moment, but anyway. In an interview with the Chronicle, Newsom said he also plans to create within 6 months about 550 units of new supportive housing for troubled homeless people, and to make city agencies collect numbers on exactly how many homeless are getting which services so we can better determine what the most pressing needs are. I recognize that I'm setting myself up. I'm not naive to that, Newsom said in the Friday interview. I don't want to overpromise, but I also don't want to underdeliver. I want to hit the ground running. By creating a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, he said the city will be able to compete for special funding that the federal government intends to make available in the coming year to cities with such plans. This will be particularly crucial considering that the city and state both face severe budget shortfalls. This was made in 2003 when Gavin Newsom was the mayor of San Francisco. And I got to tell you, 10 years later in 2013, homelessness was solved in San Francisco, completely solved. There was not a single chronic oh wait, no, that's not true.
You mean San Francisco over the last 11 years still has homeless people?
Oh my gosh. And here we are in 2024, and it turns out homelessness in San Francisco is still a major problem, and apparently he's exported the problem to the rest of the state. Apparently the state was so impressed with what Gavin Newsom did in San Francisco that they said, could you do it to the rest of the state? And Gav was like, sure can. Oh my gosh. So let's look at this. So that was 2003. Let's go to today. Governor Newsom announces homelessness funding, calls for greater accountability. This is from gov.california.gov. What you need to know. Governor Gavin Newsom today held a virtual press conference announcing that nearly $200 million in new state funds to help people move out of encampments and into housing. Along with this announcement, the governor also announced new measures that will increase oversight of state homelessness funding to ensure accountability by local jurisdictions. Wait a second. I thought he was already doing that in 2003. Wasn't he going to ensure that he got all the data on how this money was being spent in San Francisco so that he could...
I'm willing to bet that most, if not all of that 200 million has gone to NGOs like the kind that you were reading through earlier in this podcast.
Well, we actually have it. So we're going to go ahead and look at, we got another article here, and this has to do with, this is California. Let me see if I can get it here. CalMatters.org. California homelessness. Where are the state's billions going? Here's the new best answer. This is from February of 2023. Okay. In summary, for the first time, a new state report offers a bird eye view of how much the state has spent to halt homelessness. Nearly $10 billion over 3 years. Of the 500,000 Californians who made use of those numbers, more than 40% ended up housed. Okay. Which also means the majority did not, or the state lost track of their whereabouts. In Sacramento, there's a word that keeps popping up around discussions about the state's homelessness crisis: accountability. Governor Gavin Newsom has scolded cities and counties for failing to get more people off the street, hundreds of millions in state spending notwithstanding. Californians deserve accountability and results, not settling for the status quo. Governor Newsom, you are the status quo. Like, do you get that at this point? You were promising to end this in one city in 2003. And I think we all would have understood if you didn't completely end it, but you certainly didn't get the results you promised there, and you're not getting it from the state because this is more about increasing power. In California, it's about increasing power in Sacramento into the hands of people like Gavin Newsom. They need to take more of your money so they can give it to more of the NGOs, which inevitably support, endorse, and campaign for them. Right. And that's how the cycle works.
NGOs, can you say what that acronym
Non-government organizations.
Thank
In
you.
this case, it's 501c3s. So let's look at another thing here. This is also from California Matters. This is in April, right? So that last article I just read from talking about the billions that's being spent. This is from April. California fails to track its homelessness spending or results. A new audit says. I am surprised by neither. All right, here we go. There is so little data available, it's impossible to even tell if several of California's largest homelessness programs are working, according to the statewide audit released Tuesday. Exactly how much is California spending to combat homelessness, and is it working? It turns out no one knows. That's the result of a much anticipated statewide audit released Tuesday, which calls into question the state's ability to track and analyze its spending on homelessness services. The state doesn't have current information on the ongoing costs and results of its homelessness program because the agency tasked with gathering that data, the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, has analyzed no spending past 2021, according to the report by State Auditor Grant Parks. 3 of the 5 state programs the audit analyzed, including the state's main homelessness funding source, didn't even produce enough data for Parks to determine whether or not they were effective. Oh, but surely that's as bad as it gets, right? Nope, we got more. Let's look at this other one. How much does it cost? This is a really interesting one. This is also from April. The auditor found that CalWorks programs spent an average of $12,000 to $22,000 per household with a single chronically homeless person can cost taxpayers as much as $50,000 per year. So in California, just so we're clear, in California, they are spending roughly $50,000 per homeless person. The report evaluated 5 state homelessness programs and found two likely are cost-effective. Likely cost-effective. Newsom's signature Home Key program helps cities and counties turn hotels and other buildings into homeless housing at an average cost of $144,000 per unit in the program's first round, compared to $380,000 or $570,000 it would cost for new construction. This begs the question, why does it cost that much for new construction? Right? So Gavin Newsom's programs over here and the local and the city programs in blue cities, where this is primarily a plague, make it so expensive to build new housing that what they did, this is Newsom's signature home key program, helped cities and counties turn hotels and other buildings into homeless housing at an average cost of $144,000 per unit. The CalWorks Housing Support Program, which gives financial help to families who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless, also saves the state money because it's much cheaper to help someone stay housed than it is to help them find housing once they become homeless. So again, part of what he's spending this on is he's saying, if you're in danger of becoming homeless, we're going to give you money to keep you where you're at. All right, let's look at another one here. Spending totals per homeless. All right. This one was actually back in July. So in July, it was California put aside $7.2 billion to address homelessness in 2021 and 2022 state budget. Last year, there was an estimated 172,000 homeless statewide, which equates to spending nearly $42,000 per homeless person. So that number's gone up. That number's gone up since July of 2023. Spending of this magnitude, which only accounts for state money, is sufficient if it were applied effectively. The worsening crisis indicates that something is off with how the state spends its resources. This perspective is important in light of a comprehensive homeless survey by UC San Francisco. Many of its findings are enlightening, but too many of its suggestions call for more spending. It strains credulity to believe that spending $42,000 per person is insufficient, but if bumped up to $45,000, all will be okay. California does not have the worst in the nation homelessness crisis because it spends too little. This is one of the things that I want to get to, because these are all articles based off of studies that were conducted either by the state or UC San Francisco, which shows that California is spending anywhere between $42,000 and $50,000 per homeless person. Now, keep in mind, there's also federal dollars that factor into that as well. So it's not just when you factor in federal dollars, it probably goes up. And yet, does anyone feel that California is on the cusp of solving the housing crisis?
It's getting worse. It's getting worse over time in California. And part of the problem is there's two reasons why homelessness exists. And unfortunately, within public discourse and certainly within public policy, only one of those two reasons is ever talked about. And it's presented as if that's the only reason. We've talked a lot in a lot of these NGOs that we've read through with a lot of their, flowery language that they put out. They've talked a lot about, unforeseen circumstances, right? Losing a job or going through a divorce or, going through abuse or something like that. There's genuinely negative things that can happen to a person that can put them on the streets. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, a lot of these advocacy groups and certainly the politicians that are funding them only want to talk about the homelessness crisis that's facing states like California as if factor one that I just listed out is the only reason that homelessness exists in the first place. But we all know that that is not the only reason. I have an aunt that used to live in LA County. She moved to Florida. She's very conservative. Yeah. And, she told me, Christian, everybody wants to talk as if it's just that, these people can't get jobs and that the housing market is the only reason that people are living on the streets, because California has an insanely terrible housing market, right? Yeah. The average house in San Francisco costs well over $1 million. But she told me, she's like, Christian, everybody wants to talk about as if the lack of housing is the only reason that people are on the streets. No, they're on the streets because of mental illness and drugs and alcoholism and other substance abuses. Yeah. That's the reason that they're on the streets. It's not because they can't afford a home. Now, the lack of housing affordability creates other problems, and it might exacerbate this problem. But unfortunately, we're not allowed to talk about how a huge number of the people that are on the streets in California are on the streets because they have mental health problems or they have substance abuse problems, or they can't get a job because they're on something like the sex offender list. Yeah. Which is our good friend Nate was telling us before we started recording today, his experiences working in Prince William County in homeless ministry and how a lot of people that are homeless have fallen into one of those three categories, right? Yeah. But unfortunately, policymakers only want to talk about this problem from a perspective of, well, these are all victims. Yeah. Some of them might be. Some of them very well might be. I guarantee you 100% of them are not, though. And when we talk about this problem, we only talk about this from a perspective of these are all victims of society and we need more money.
Yeah.
Those are the only two things that were presented. And if you approach this topic from any other perspective, you're a bigot for doing so.
Yeah.
But that's the reason that we have the crisis right now. It's because the government is handing out needles to people in San Francisco and then wondering, why is there more public drug use? I don't know. Maybe it's because you're subsidizing the public drug use.
Well, I want to pull up this article by PolitiFact of all places. So this article by PolitiFact, it said, and this was talking about whether or not Gavin Newsom was solving homelessness in San Francisco. So Newsom was San Francisco's mayor from January 2004 to January 2011. He has served as the state's lieutenant governor for the past 7+ years. This is, again, an older article. For his part, Newsom has often pointed to his role in cutting San Francisco's street population by 40% during his time as mayor, adding his administration got 12,000 people off the street. His campaign has cited the 2009 San Francisco homeless count and survey to support that statement. We examined that claim in May and rated it half true. We found Newsom cherry-picked the time frame of his reduction, which took place from 2002 to 2009, 2 years before he became mayor to 2 years before he left that office. So he only picked the numbers 2 years before he left office. The street population went back up by 400 during his final 2 years, but even considering that uptick, the city's unsheltered total still decreased by 31% from 2002 to 2011. So that's the good news, right? Tracking San Francisco's overall homeless population. We also know that Newsom's statement does not reflect the slight increase in San Francisco's overall homeless population during his time as mayor. The first available report during his tenure from 2005 shows a total of 6,248. By January 2011, Newsom's final month in office, that number was 6,455. San Francisco's most recent overall count from June 2017 places that total at 7,499. That's 1,045 higher than Newsom's final month as mayor. So the problem is again, if the programs you're putting in place are not actually reducing it overall, if they're just slightly, let's say, preventing the increase from going as fast as it was, that's not exactly ending chronic homelessness, is it? And then if it gets better, and then if it gets even worse, because this is another thing politicians like to do. They like to put out programs, and then they will cherry pick and manipulate the statistics to get the best results they possibly can, right? And then when they leave and the problem increases, a lot of times it's not because they dealt with the fundamental issues of the problem. What happened is one mayor switches out their program with a different program, or they look at different stats in order to track what's going on. And all of this comes back to a very, very simple problem. This is what happens when the government's responsible for doing these things, because ultimately what they end up doing is sending a bunch of money to their buddies, to their allies, in order to deal with the problem. And the question is do the people spending this money have any sort of incentive to actually solve the problem, or do they have incentive to increasingly suggest to politicians that, oh, we need more funding. We're just another program away, just another funding away, just another budget cycle away, right? We're helping. It would be so much worse without us. That's one of the favorite lines of a politician. Oh my gosh, thank God we did this thing that didn't actually work, because it would have been so much worse if we hadn't done the thing that we promised you would work. Let's look at another article here. This one is from September of 2022, and it's from a site called LAmerican.com. Newsom promised in 2008 to fix homelessness. Instead, he made it worse. In December of 2008, he still looked young and not as controversial a political figure on the national level. He also enjoyed some popularity for being a progressive star on the rise, and he decided to launch a direct communication platform for California voters, YouTube. This was the then mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, who in 2008, using the crudest demagoguery, made a promise he never kept to end the homeless crisis in one of the Golden State's most populous city in 10 years. This is Gavin Newsom. We believe fundamentally that food solves hunger, that shelter solves sleep, and that housing solves homelessness. Sounds like Nina Turner. And if we are going to solve the problem of those that are on the street that we define as homeless, we better solve the housing problem if we're going to have an impact. That's why we established this framework, as we call it, in a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness in San Francisco, Newsom said about almost 14 years ago in a video recently resurfaced on social media. Spoiler alert. Not only could Gavin Newsom not end homelessness in San Francisco by 2018, a decade after his promise, but by 2022, the situation has worsened throughout California under his tenure as governor. Today, there are places in California where you can't even walk. The streets are filled with feces and the smell of marijuana. Insecurity reigns, and the housing crisis is growing, and the homeless are multiplying in the face of state inoperativeness. Numbers don't lie. Here are some data that expose the failure of the governor of California to combat the homelessness crisis of the 15 cities in the U.S. with more homeless per 100,000 inhabitants. Of the 15 cities in the U.S. with more homeless per 100,000 inhabitants, California has no more and no less than 10 on the list, including the first 6: Santa Cruz, Watsonville, Salinas, Santa Maria, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, San Luis Obispo, San Jose. The first 6 from the highest to lowest: Santa Barbara 9th, San Francisco 11th, Turlock 12th, Stockton 14th. So when you look at this overall list, California is all over it. And it's not because they're not spending enough money. It's because, once again, they patently refuse to address the real problems. And the real problems range from everything from tearing apart families, right, to making it impossible to build new housing units. There was a whole expose on this done by the New York Times, where they were saying that, yeah, it's actually, if you go to some of the bluest cities in California, actually it's all over the country, but they use California as a use case. It's the NIMBY people, right? Not in my backyard. Well, yes, of course we want affordable housing, but we don't want to build this over here. This is going to ruin our view, or it's going to change the dynamic of our community. So what do they want? Well, they just want politicians to promise they're going to do another 10-year plan, and they're going to get tens of millions of federal dollars, and they're going to put billions of their own state dollars into it, and they're going to spend on average of $42,000 to $50,000 per year between homeless person, and not achieve the results. So here's the question you got to ask yourself. If it isn't working, why would you continue to do it?
Because the purpose of a system is what it does.
The purpose of a system is what it does, and what this does is funnel billions of dollars from taxpayers into organizations that are friendly to Gavin Newsom and the mayors that run these cities. They are using your tax dollars to fund their political allies. There you go. Am I saying they don't do any of the work? No, they do. Yeah, they run some homeless shelters. There's an Episcopal group in San Francisco. They run a lot of homeless shelters, right? But are all these organizations also just coincidentally big fans of more public spending on homeless programs that inevitably go to them? Yes, they sure are. They sure are. Are they big fans of the politicians? They don't come directly out and support those politicians. They just take all the bills that they like, which happen to be carried by those politicians, and go out to their audiences and advocate for them.
And they donate huge money to their campaigns.
No, they don't. No. Not as an organization.
Their members
but if
do.
you look at their members,
as individuals and members, they do. It's the same thing. UC San Francisco doesn't give any money to Gavin Newsom. I mean, yeah, sure, their staff and faculty do, right, but not UC San Francisco.
Over 95% of their staff and faculty do.
That's a public institution.
Let me rephrase that. Over 95% of the staff and faculty that do give money to candidates, because not everybody do. They give it to left wing. This is the problem that I wish more conservatives and more Republicans would wake up and realize. We fund our opposition. They fund their allies.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we lose.
Mm-hmm.
It's because we are funding people that are voting against us, and they're funding people that are voting for them.
Yeah.
And then we wonder, how could we lose elections over and over again? How could people continue to vote for these? Don't they understand that these policies are self-destructive? Don't they understand that California is creating the problem, not fixing the problem? Guess what? You're operating under the myth of the rational voter. When somebody has a built-in financial incentive to push a certain set of policies because it gives them a set of power or wealth that they otherwise would not have, it doesn't matter if the rest of civilization's burning down around them. They got theirs. They're going to continue voting for the people who gave them theirs. And then we wonder why we lose. Maybe we should stop giving money to NGOs that put up a bunch of flowery language about how they're fixing all these problems within society. Non-partisan, right? Who has profited from the homeless crisis financially and politically? This is actually from the California Globe.
And this was, when was this article? This was December 28th of 2019. 2019. So let's go ahead and scroll down here a little bit and take a look here. All right. The list includes disgraced Congresswoman Katie Hill and LA City Councilman Bonin. You're kidding me. What do disgraced Congresswoman Katie Hill and Los Angeles Councilman Mike Bonin, the nonprofit Path developer Thomas Safran, and Executive Director Peter Lynn of the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority have in common? They are all profiting or have profited from the so-called homeless crisis. There is also a connection among this crew of self-proclaimed homeless advocates of receiving six-figure salaries stemming from ballot initiatives to public donations, campaign contributions, and sweetheart deals. California Globe has been focusing on the money behind the homeless crisis. This crisis is a strain for the average California resident, but a booming business for others. Maybe it is time for the voters and taxpayers in Los Angeles to say bah humbug to the misers who continue to ask for millions to help the needy while lining their own pockets. On Christmas Day, President Donald Trump spent the holidays paying close attention to the homeless crisis plaguing the liberals' run state by attacking Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. In March 2017, here we go. Oh, there we go. The homeless crisis appears to be manufactured for groups and people to profit through social programs and government positions. Those claiming to be able to fix the crisis continue to hold their hands out for state and federal funds, placing their value on how much public money they can raise and spread around to campaign donors instead of results. In March 2017, when Measure H was passed by Los Angeles County voters, this quarter-cent sales tax was estimated to raise $355 million a year for 10 years to fund homeless services and prevention. The sales tax increase will amount to $3.55 billion, yet the city continues to ask for more funding. However, Measure H also allowed $41.1 million to be advanced to LASHA for Lynn to fund ramped up services and operating expenses. Despite millions being thrown at the homeless crisis under Lynn's watch, the amount of homeless grew by 33%. Lynn, who is stepping down at the end of December, has been making close to $250,000 a year for the last 5 years. I guarantee you that was not their only source of income. Columnist Brian Baker wrote against Measure H in a piece for The Signal, "When is enough? Because let's face it, when this program ends up not actually preventing homelessness, which is exactly how things will turn out, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to come back to the well to drink." Right? He's right. He's right. Every single thing that they always promise you, this one will be the one, this one will be the one, this one will be the one. And then what ends up happening? Millions, if not billions of dollars go to these organizations where you always have boards and people running the program making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They don't solve the problem. In fact, in many cases, the problem gets worse. And their answer is always, we need more money. Because if it wasn't for us, think about how much worse it would have been. Nope, I'm done with that. I think you're the problem. I think you have set up a situation where you profit from a problem and you have no real incentives to stop the problem, especially when you have discovered that the politicians you help elect also have no incentive to solve the problem. What they have an incentive to do is to get reelected. And the way they do that is by gathering enough campaign cash and gathering enough strong allies and buying enough airtime to tell voters, we are addressing the homelessness problem. Yes, they are. They are addressing a homelessness problem. Gavin Newsom desperately wants to live in the governor's mansion, and he doesn't. He's at risk. He's at risk of losing his home, the governor's mansion. And now with just more spending, he can keep it. Right? That's what this is. Politicians want to live in public housing, namely the White House, governor's mansions. You know, that's the public housing they're really concerned about. The ones that come with a whole hell of a lot of power.
I don't mind them being in public housing.
Jail.
Prisons are public housing.
What's crazy about all of this is that it hasn't stopped. It's ramped up. And you would think in a state like California, as public services disintegrate and as the homeless population actually grows over time, and now it's getting to a point where it's like law and order is not even being enforced in some of these places, mm-hmm. right? Like in San Francisco, they vigorously enforce the ban on plastic bags.
Yes.
Right? They will, if you carry a magazine that has a certain number of rounds in it over the state limit, you're going to jail.
Oh yeah. Don't
right?
pay your state taxes on time and watch what happens.
And see what happens in San Francisco. But if you break into somebody's car, if you break into somebody's store, if you're shooting up on the streets,
If you squat in someone's home.
not only will we not enforce any sort of laws against that, we're actually going to spend, in the case of California, $10 billion. You know what? Not actually housing you. We're going to spend $10 billion lecturing the public about how they need to change their bigoted perceptions about you.
Yeah.
Because it's all in service to the eternal progressive omni-cause.
I don't blame the homeless. I blame the politicians. I was joking with Nick. I said, I kind of think we should bring back tarring and feathering. And he responded with, well, tarring and feathering is a pretty brutal practice. And I said, I think we should bring back tarring and feathering.
Tina's like, I already like it. You don't got to convince me.
I'm fine with that. Some of these people, they don't feel the pain of their policies. And so maybe they need to feel some pain of their policies.
I think one of the things that's frustrating me is, again, the person on the left will look at this and say, you guys just spent the whole time just bashing the homeless. What are your solutions? Okay, well, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that because that's important. But we're also going to explain why the solutions that are being offered by the left have already been tried for decades. It's not as if, well, they just had one shot at it and they're just working out some of the kinks and all of it, but they'll get there. They'll get another 10 billion and they'll be there. No, they've already done all this for decades. They've done all this for decades. It's always been the same plan. It's always been the same solution. It always leads to the same results. And yet they always come back begging for more and saying that if you don't give it to them, it's because you're mean and you're greedy. And by the way, they don't even care what you think as a taxpayer anymore because they're educating your children. And if they can't convince you, they will definitely convince your kids of it.
Oh, yeah. And they'll even import other people's kids from other states because Gavin Newsom also signed a bill which basically promotes child trafficking because he was saying that, if your kid wants to transition, we'll go ahead and house them. We'll bring them here. Let's traffic the child to California.
So let's look at a couple of the issues that these groups, these nonprofits, right, the ones that were telling us we got to change all of our misconceptions and here's what the real problem is. So what was one of the things they said repeatedly, right? Minimum wage. The problem is minimum wage isn't high enough. Well, I'm going to read this article. This was from July 10th of 2023. Foundation for Economic Education. Minimum wage laws increase homelessness. New study finds. Now, that seems counterintuitive, but let's read through it. One thing Lang Martinez said he learned after living on the streets of Ventura County, California, was that being homeless was worse than being in prison. It's a different lifestyle. You think prison is bad? No, prison's got structure. Martinez, a former Los Angeles gang member turned advocate against homelessness, recently told California Insider, the streets got what they call rules of engagement. Though Martinez agrees with the conventional wisdom that mental illness and drug abuse are the primary catalyst for homelessness, new academic research suggests the picture is more complicated. A fresh study of the University of California, San Francisco suggests that losing income is the single biggest driver of homelessness, ahead of mental illness, drug addiction, and other causes, the study authors say. I think it's really important to note how desperate poor people are and how much it is their poverty and high housing costs that are leading to the crisis, said Margaret Kuschel, a physician and leader of the University California San Francisco Beinhoff Homelessness and Housing Initiative, which conducted the study. California is home to approximately 30% of the entire U.S. homeless population, 115,491 people as of 2022, and some advocates express hope that new research would inform a statewide strategy to combat the problem. Separate research, however, suggests California's own policies have exacerbated its homelessness epidemic, including a new paper written by University of California economist Seth Hill titled Minimum Wages and Homelessness, published last month. Utilizing data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development and other sources, Hill examined 100 cities from 2006 to 2019 to determine the relationship between wage floors and homelessness. Merging administrative data from HUD to state and local minimum wage laws suggests that minimum wages induce increases in homeless counts, Hill writes. When cities raise their minimum wage by 10%, relative homeless counts increase by 3 to 4%. Hill's paper will not be the last word on the relationship between minimum wage laws and homelessness, but provides yet more evidence of a stubborn reality minimum wage proponents will often overlook. Minimum wage laws often harm the very people they are designed to help. Okay, let's explain this real quick. Because I want people to understand, not just from a study perspective or an academic perspective, but what is so often lost on a lot of studies, because going back before we said, there's 3 types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can essentially get a study to say whatever you want, provided that you use the statistics that you want, and then you come to certain conclusions about those statistics. The right can do it too, right? So let's look at it logically first. If you are homeless, chances are you do not have a lot of economically viable skills, right? Well, I'm willing to bet, again, we don't have a lot of homeless thoracic surgeons. I'm willing to bet we don't have a lot of homeless rocket scientists, okay? So if you're homeless, chances are you do not have a lot of marketable skills. Chances are you are capable of doing a lot of things that are manual labor or don't require a great deal of education or experience. What this means is that you are competing for jobs at the lowest rung on the ladder. So if a company is looking for hiring people to do a particular task, and that task requires you to sweep floors or wash dishes or whatever else it is, that's a task that they cannot afford to pay a lot of money to because it will increase their overall labor costs. So they can only afford to pay you a certain amount. What happens when a state arbitrarily comes in and drastically increases that price like they do in places like Virginia? Well, it doesn't impact the vast majority of laborers. Why? Because about 97% of the labor force is already making more than minimum wage. Now, when the minimum wage goes up, other people, especially those closer to the minimum wage, also expect their wages to go up as well, right? If you're the sort of business that can't afford, you don't have a lot of flexibility in your prices because you're living at the margins of everything, then you have a decision to make. You either have to automate if that's possible. That's why you see a lot of kiosks and things like grocery stores and fast food restaurants and things like that. Why? Because it's not especially difficult to push the buttons on the kiosk to indicate what you want. That's just not that difficult. That's not a job which commands a high salary. But if you desperately need that job, you want to be able to do some sort of work. Maybe you're in a situation where it's you and another person and you are sharing an apartment and both of you got minimum wage jobs. So it's not that one person is trying to do the apartment, right? This happens all the time, especially with younger people, right? One of us can't afford the apartment. What are we going to do? We're going to get roommates. Okay, maybe all 3 roommates are now doing minimum wage. Now you got 3 times what the minimum wage is going toward rent. So now you can afford it. What happens when they raise the minimum wage? Well, now the person that looks at you and says, I'm sorry, I can't afford to hire you at this rate to do this task. You're either going to need to do other things, or I'm going to have to automate, or I have to increase my prices. Well, what happens when I increase my prices? Now the person making minimum wage can't buy as many things if a lot of other people are having to increase their prices as well. Mm-hmm. Right? Which inevitably will cause things like rents to go up. Why? Because you made it more expensive to live in that place.
So to give you an idea, and let me finish this thought because I know I'm going to say something and you're going to jump to the next thing. So give me a second. California in January 2024 enacted a new minimum wage of $16 an hour. In April of 2024, they enacted a new minimum wage for fast food workers and food service workers like that of $20 an hour. But he did make sure that his buddies, Panera Bread, they were going to be able to be exempt because they bake their bread in-house. They put all these exemptions in place. And if you look at who's exempt, they all donate to Gavin Newsom. So they just did all of this. What happens? Homelessness explodes even more. You've got people who lose their jobs because nobody can afford that. Now people are really mad about how expensive burgers have gotten.
Yeah.
And they're like, these greedy, rich
corporations,
business owners, shrinkflation?
Yeah.
Oh, they get so mad about shrinkflation. And Biden's then going, we're going to enact some laws to penalize these companies for shrinking the amounts you're getting inside your packages. This is shrinkflation, and it's not fair, and they're greedy.
I love it because the same politicians that are causing the problems are now offering themselves as the solution. And once again, it's the same corporate boogeyman because it's an easy boogeyman. And honestly, for some corporations, I want to look at them and be like, good luck. These are the politicians you supported. These are the politicians you gave to. These are the politicians that we told you are going to be problems for you because they don't understand. They don't care about how economics works. They care about how voting works. And if I can convince somebody that doesn't understand how economics works, that you're the big, evil, mean, bad guy because look at your nice house of the CEO, they'll vote for me and I can take stuff from you and I can give it to them even though it's going to cost them their job. And then when they get fired, I'm going to be like, yeah, it's because that big, mean, greedy corporation fired. It has nothing to do with the fact that we arbitrarily increase the cost to hire you by 10, 20, 30, 40%. It has nothing to do with that. It couldn't possibly be that we made it so much more expensive to hire you that the company fired you. No. The only possible explanation must be that the company is greedy. What about the politicians? Do politicians ever get called greedy for constantly taxing and regulating and controlling more? No, because that's in public service. Give me a freaking break. So the first thing we're gonna move on to the next one here because when it comes to the minimum wage, what I want people to logically here's what people need to logically understand about the minimum wage. Take away all of your hopes, dreams, and aspirations about what the minimum wage should mean for low-skilled labor or for an entry-level position. Take all of that away, and here's what I want you to understand. This is the only thing the minimum wage does. It makes it illegal to hire someone at a certain rate. I brought this up in Virginia. They're like, we're going to raise the minimum wage to $13.50 an hour, and this is going to lift people out of poverty, and it's going to do this. I said, here's what you did. You hope it will do this, but here's what I know it will do. It will make it illegal for someone to offer somebody a job at $13.49 an hour, and in certain parts of this state, that's a pretty good job for an entry-level position. And you just made it illegal. What if the person wants the job? What if they're willing to say, hey, look, I get it. The minimum wage is higher, but I want to sign a waiver because I really need this job. Tough. What if the business owner says, you know what, I'm going to take a risk on you, but I can't afford to pay you this much. I can pay you this much. And they both agree to it. Tough. Why? Because a politician decided that they knew more than the two people engaging in that transaction. The politician who never met you, who never met the business owner, who never met anybody in this situation, they're the ones that decided for the rest of us. And when that person loses a job, and maybe that was the only thing that was keeping them from homelessness. That same politician goes in and looks at that homeless person and goes, you know, the problem here is housing. The problem here is we don't have enough government programs. The problem here is that evil boss that fired you because they couldn't afford to pay you. That's the problem. I'll tell you what the problem is never the politician. No. They're never the problem. It's always somebody else. And as long as you vote to give them more power, they'll address your issue next time. So from a statistical standpoint, but most importantly, from a logical standpoint, if you make it significantly more expensive to hire somebody for a particular job, the job will go away. If the job has to exist, then all of the prices associated with the goods and services that are affected by that job will now have to go up. That is an immutable law of economics. It just is. So any politician that is promising you that this is going to be the solution to homelessness, they're lying to you. And the organizations that are pushing minimum wage, they don't care because they're not paying minimum wage at their 501c3. Why? Because they got millions of dollars coming in. Or because they'll get themselves an exemption. Because after all, they're a charity. All right, let's look at this next one. Because this one's also really important. What was the next thing they talked about? They talked about things like minimum wage and rent control. Rent control, that's the reason why people are going homeless, is because these greedy landlords are increasing the rent, right? And they have to be forced to stop that. We have to force the landlords to not be able to increase rent. I'm not talking about increasing rent outside of contract, right? If you sign a contract for a year at a particular rate, you can't just raise that rate. That's a law. That's contract law. We support that. But if your contract's up and they decide to raise the rent, I get that might stink. I might not like that. We've had that before where our rent went up. But why did the rent go up? Well, Because the same politicians that are not allowing for the construction of new housing have just made all the existing housing more expensive. Because more people are now competing to get into that housing. Now, if you're the landlord, you're probably thinking, well, gosh, they did fine on this. They did fine on this rent before. Why can't they accept the same rent? Because inflation affects them too. Because all of their costs also went up. Because the cost of maintaining this building went up. Because the taxes associated went up. Because the regulations involved went up. Because they have to renovate in order to do something new for green energy, and that went up. Because all of those costs went up as a result of the politician that is telling you that your landlord is the bad guy. All of their costs went up. So guess what happens to your rent? It goes up.
But Nick, demand curves slope downwards, right?
Yeah.
What's funny is that it's all about supply and demand. But unfortunately, as Thomas Sowell pointed out, the first law of economics is about supply and demand, right? It's
the first law about economics is scarcity. There's never enough to meet the needs of everybody or the wants and desires of everybody. The first law of politics is to ignore the first law of economics.
Yes, that's the full quote.
Yeah.
And when you look at things like rent control, which is a deadly combination of a popular policy that is extremely bad, right? If you were to divide policies between popular and unpopular and positive and negative in terms of its actual benefits if it's implemented, rent control goes into that quadrant of popular policy that is very bad.
Yeah.
It's quite rare that you get an unpopular policy that's also very bad, but there's plenty of very popular policies that are terrible. And the problem with rent control is that you're quite literally restricting supply by implementing rent control. But it's not just that. They also subsidize demand through stimulus checks or through housing assistance. There's all sorts of programs, and it's actually increased ever since you've had millions of people pouring across the southern border under Biden's administration. You have this problem in New York City, for example, where the city government is handing out like credit cards to illegal immigrants and giving them money. They're also handing out like vouchers for them to find a place to rent. And so you're subsidizing demand by giving people money either directly or indirectly for them to purchase rent. But then you're restricting supply either through outright making it illegal to build new housing through zoning and permitting or taxes and regulations, or you're restricting supply in the form of rent control.
Yeah.
So what happens when you restrict supply, but you subsidize demand through government funds to people? Well, you see rationing is ultimately what you see, because there's simply not enough supply, but there's a whole number of people now that have the means and resources and the desire to find, places to rent because they're being subsidized to do so. But you don't have the appropriate amount of supply in order to accommodate this new demand. What you end up having is prices go up, but then the government says, well, you're not allowed to increase prices. So now you've set a ceiling on what you can set prices, despite the fact that the government created the market pressure that sent the prices up in the first place. So now what do you do if you're a landlord? You Airbnb it out rather than you rent it out. And so then you get a crackdown on Airbnbs that you see in a lot of blue states and blue cities. This is also something that's happening in Europe. It's unfortunately, it's very popular in the UK and Ireland right now, where the same thing is taking place. And so then as the landlord, what do you do when you say, well, there's a cap on the rent and the government's now cracking down on Airbnbs. So now I'm just going to speculate in the real estate market and I'm going to flip it and sell it.
Yeah.
And then that drives up home prices.
Yeah.
Because now you have it's like the government is pushing its hand down on one scale within the economy, but then they don't understand that when their actions are artificially distorting market mechanisms in order to restrict supply or increase prices in one area, now what they're doing is that they're telling the market, you must operate in this area. Yeah. And so then the market operates in this area. And then we wonder why housing prices, particularly in places like New York City and California, are at effectively record high levels where most people can't afford it. And then we get these flowery articles. I keep saying flowery in this episode, but we keep getting all these articles from these left-wing NGOs talking about how, well, nobody can afford rent or nobody can afford a house in New York City unless they're making X amount of money. Yeah, it's because your policies made it illegal to build, made it not economical to rent, and then you outlawed things like short-term rentals, and so now you're incentivizing people to just go into the housing market and flip things and sell them for a higher cost than what they originally bought at, and so now you're driving up the cost because of your policies.
Well, the left expects people to operate at a loss in order to facilitate their preferred political policies, and when it turns out people don't do that, they look for ways to work around it so they can operate at a profit or at least break even. Then all of a sudden the policies fail. And so what does the left do? They come back with additional policies. Inevitably, what the left ends up always figuring out at some point is the real problem is people. People don't respond the way they think they should respond to left-wing policies. And that's why people always end up being the ones that suffer the most, because they end up getting put in jail or having their property confiscated or lined up against a wall. And people are like, well, that's extreme. I am telling you, if you give the left enough control over the economy and enough control over government, that is always the conclusion they come to. Like, go look at the Soviet Union. Go look at Maoist China. China came to the conclusion that the problem is people. The problem is their people. That's why they forced a one-child policy. That's why they constantly monitor their citizens. That's why they constantly jail people that don't think the way they think that they should. Because the problem is not their policies failing. No. The problem is the people never lived up to the high aspirations that those politicians had for them. And at the end of the day, they always end up turning on people because, God forbid, they actually change the way they think about things. And this is where we're at. And another example. So rent control, again, let's think about this logically, right? The superficial understanding is rent is too dang high. Let's just set a cap at it, okay? But if the cost of the housing, if the cost of the maintenance, if the cost of everything else around the economy is going up and rents are not allowed to go up as well, then what do people eventually do? Well, the landlord is going to look for one of two options. They're either going to look for government subsidies. The landlords will actively work to try to restrict other growth, so they can try to get subsidies to justify the additional rent costs, or they become slumlords. They stop fixing the plumbing. They stop fixing the AC. They stop fixing those things. Why? Because the money's not in it.
Yeah, they can't afford it.
It doesn't support the upkeep. And I saw this last year as politicians go, we're not going after good landlords. We're going after slumlords. Why'd they become slumlords? Mm-hmm. Now, are there such a thing as landlords that are just horrible human beings? Sure. You'll find horrible human beings in every walk of life, to include politics.
Yeah.
But no, the assumption is that, well, if that building is dilapidated and it's fallen into disrepair, then the problem is the landlord. And I want to give an example of this. We did a whole Y-minute on this, on rent control. And the reason why this story was so compelling was because an advocate, a disciple of Saul Alinsky, who was a huge, progressive community organizer. He wrote Rules for Radicals, dedicated it to Satan, right? One of the things that they love to do is they love to organize renters against the landlord. And it was always about making demands for repairs or making demands for rent or whatever it was. And so there was this one incident, I think it was in Chicago. Again, you can go check out the Y-minute on rent control. And the attorney for all of the renters gathers in the lobby, and he hears from the attorney from the landlord. And the landlord says, I want to meet with the tenants. I'm willing to give them an offer in order to settle all of these grievances. And so they said, okay. And they all meet together and all the tenants are there, and the landlord shows up, and the landlord attorney steps forward and says, before we get started on all the grievances, I want you to know that my client is willing to sell the property to the tenants for $1. And all the tenants start cheering, and the attorney for the tenants all of a sudden is like, what is going on? And that's when the realization came into play. It's like, because the attorney got it, right? The attorney for the tenants, the one that had riled them up, the one that had done all the community organizing, he realized that, wait a second, if this guy is willing to give us this building, which presumably is worth a whole hell of a lot more than $1, right? Just based off of the materials and the location and everything else. If he's willing to get us for $1, there is a reason. What is it? And it's not because it's tax exempt. What is it? Oh, it's because the government and your politicians and your policies have made it so expensive to maintain and run this building that it would be cheaper for me to offload it than it would be to incur the additional expense. So your tenants are about to find out how much damage you've really done on their behalf. Here you go, $1, it's all yours. Sign here. And that's when they realize, oh, we might have a problem. Yes, you do. Yes, you do, because economic reality is reality. And the number of politicians I come face to face with are like, this isn't about economics. This is about people. I got news for you. Economics is about people. And if you don't understand how economics works and you try to force feed your vision of how it should work, people will get hurt in the process. The first people to get hurt, the first people to get really hurt, will be the ones that you think are standing in the way of the reality you wish existed. The second people to get hurt will be all the people you used to punish those people. Every single time. So rent control doesn't work because, again, logically, if you are forcing rent below what the market rate actually is for that, you're going to encourage slumlords. You're going to encourage abandonment because it no longer makes sense. People build homes to be able to sell them. People rent property to be able to make money off of renting the property, right? Mm-hmm. And if you no longer make it profitable, people won't build and people won't rent, and then you end up with a lot of people that can't afford it. Can't afford anything at this point. And that leads us to the second thing, right? Which is this whole idea of, well, the solution to homelessness is houses. Like Gavin Newsom said it himself. Solution to homelessness is more housing. Okay, Gav, what'd you do to make sure that happened? Oh, you did it. And we know because here's the record right here. This is from an article in 2020. California has more homeless people than any other state, with large homeless tent camps occupying the sidewalks of many of its streets. California also has the second most expensive housing of all states, lagging only behind Hawaii. Writing at the Washington Examiner, Timothy P. Carney wonders to what extent the state's government regulatory environment is contributing to both problems. And then he goes into the article. Land use regulations make housing more expensive. The Los Angeles metro area ranks as the 15th most restrictive in land use regulation. People who own homes in housing restricted places often don't want to deregulate. They like the space, they fear the traffic, and they know that adding more housing could harm their home values. Of course, preserving scarcity in housing to keep your housing investment valuable is not really something most people want to admit to, so they make other arguments. They suggest that the regulations drive up home values, not by curbing supply, but by giving people what they want: green buildings, safe buildings, adequate parking, and uncrowded neighborhoods. But the one study that has looked into this finds that more than 90% of the price effect of regulation comes not from making the homes more desirable, but from limiting supply. So regulation is affecting the market mostly by preventing homes from being built. Wait a second, just one more thing. That finding raises a question. How many regulations has California put in the way of building homes? According to QuantGov last year, the state government of California imposed on businesses and residents a total of 503,000 restrictions, as defined by the number of times that words like must, shall, required, prohibited, or may not appear within the online version of the California Code of Regulations. When you have almost 400,000 regulations that you have to comply with in order to build, it gets incredibly expensive, if not so prohibitive that it makes no sense to build. And yet, I sit there in the Virginia General Assembly as left-wing politician after left-wing politician talks about the housing crisis, talks about we got to do more, and then simultaneously votes for more prevailing wage laws with respect to construction, votes for more green spaces within construction, votes for more trees required within construction. And the whole thing's the same thing. Well, we want more beautiful areas. Okay. Well, that increased the costs. And it's almost like they get angry with you. This isn't about cost. This is about making sure that we have pretty areas that people want to live in that's healthy for them. Okay. And it increased the cost. Well, that shouldn't happen. Okay. And yet it does.
You're talking about new construction. I just want to bring up one more factor that has nothing to do with new construction, and that is California occupancy laws. You are not allowed to have more than 2 people per room plus 1 person in the living space. So let's say you have a 1-bedroom with a bathroom. 3 people can live in there legally. That doesn't matter if it's your child. Like you can't occupy your master bedroom and have your baby in a crib in there. That's 3 people in that master bedroom. And then make an extra space for your other child. So they are forcing families to have to buy larger homes. So we could solve the housing crisis just like that. If we adjust the occupancy laws, more people could fit. In fact, in the old days, you would have like a one-room cottage and a whole family of 10 living in there. Yeah. I mean, it's not comfortable, but you're housed.
Yeah. Is the alternative better? Is the alternative to be homeless?
And so that's another reason. That's the reason why they need so many houses, because there's a lot of square footage available for people to live in.
When they keep advocating for an ideal without recognizing that there's a cost associated with it. And whenever you point out the cost, you're mean, you're greedy, or you're focused on economics, not people. You're focused on profit, not people. No, we're focused on the practical reality of what it costs to actually do something. Mm-hmm. But there is no free lunch. Somebody somewhere is paying for what it is that you're trying to do. And if the cost means that more people are homeless, or if the cost means that more people can't have access to a safe shelter, even if it's one that none of us might consider ideal, is it better than the alternative? If the answer is yes, then why are you doing this? And it's again, in large part, it's because they're protected from the consequences of their actions. They're protected from it. Or they'll find enough people that benefit from it. Because let's face it, yes, if you raise the minimum wage, if you're making minimum wage today, right, you and your buddy, and your wage goes up by 30%, and you keep your job, then on some level, you're going to be like, I'm better off as a result of this policy works for you. It didn't work for your buddy that got fired from the job. It didn't work for the business owner whose labor costs just went up exponentially. And then inevitably, when you come back and you go over to the movie theater, or you go buy a burger, or you go get a cup of coffee, and it's 30 cents more or 50 cents more or $1 more, you're going to sit there and be like, this isn't fair. Oh, so it was fair to arbitrarily increase your wage, but it wasn't fair to increase the cost of something because of your wage. This is clown world. This is clown world. It is absurd, and I'm tired of pretending that it isn't. And I'm tired of pretending that the people that scream the loudest about how nice and altruistic they are, that I'm supposed to care. You know, that viral feeling you get when you see somebody suffering, there's two ways you can react to that, right? That visceral reaction you get to watching somebody suffering, to somebody see somebody who's homeless. The first reaction is to say, somebody should do something, and then demand that a politician go do something. I don't care. Do something right away. Why? Because I feel bad and I don't want to feel bad. And your job is to make sure I don't feel bad about the thing I'm seeing. The other reaction is to actually understand, why is this situation taking place? Why is this happening? How do we alleviate the underlying things in order to make sure that this doesn't happen? And here's the inevitable conclusion you will come to if you want to be intellectually honest about the world. And that is, some people just need a little bit of help. Just need a little bit of help. But it will always be better if they get it from somebody that truly cares about them, as opposed to a faceless government program that is inevitably either going to want to increase its own importance, existence, and budget, or the 501c3s that are politically connected that increase and benefit as a result. The other conclusion that you're going to come to is that there are some people that keep making bad decisions, and they will continue to make them until it gets so bad that they recognize they need to do something different. But I don't see a path forward when we tell people none of this is your fault. You're not allowed to feel bad about any of the decisions you made. We as a society have to feel bad about what has happened. And we're responsible. Everyone's responsible except for the person that the thing is actually happening to. In what world, in what universe is that empowering? And yet here we are. Now, let's look at something that actually seems to be working. There's this group called, this is out of Austin. There's this group called Mobile Loaves and Fishes. Now, I'm not suggesting that this would work every single place it's tried, but what have these guys done that is different? Well, Mobile Loaves and Fishes is a Christian organization, and what they started off doing was just going around and ministering and providing food and helping homeless people. And one of the things that they recognized there was a substance abuse problem. They recognized that there was problems with respect sometimes to criminal past. They recognized that there was problems with respect to the breakdown of the family. What they eventually grew into, and this is really cool, They have this one area that they bought in conjunction with people that were willing to help them, willing to assist them. It goes, today, Community First Village occupies 51 acres on Hog Eye Road in northeast Travis County. It is currently home to more than 370 formerly homeless neighbors and will soon provide housing and community for just more than 500 of our friends who struggle to survive on the streets of Austin. Shared spaces create connections. The village has been intentionally designed to encourage community. Each home has a front porch, and homes are clustered around common areas with laundry rooms, restroom and shower facilities, outdoor community kitchens, and green space. These shared areas encourage interactions among neighbors, helping them form relationships and build community. Several other buildings and spaces located throughout the property give neighbors plenty of space to gather for conversation, activities, services, and meals. Some of the features of Community First Village include Capital Metro Bus Stop, Community Cinema and Amphitheater, Community Inn, Community Market, Community Table Outdoor Dining Area, Community Works Entrepreneur Hub, Dog Park, Genesis Gardens Organic Farm, King Park, Hope Chapel, Living Room Community Center, Memorial Garden, Health Clinic, Unity Hall. Now, when you look at these houses, what you're going to find, a lot of these are little tiny houses. They're little tiny houses, right? They may have, I'm not even sure what sort of facilities they have within the house. Some of them I think are just a place to stay. Because again, they have communal kitchens, they have communal washing areas. Now, is that ideal for a family of 4? No, probably not. Right? But it's ideal for 370 people who are living here. Now, a lot of these homes right here, these tiny homes, they're safe, they're secure. Are they one you'd want to live in? Probably not. Because guess what? This isn't supposed to be the ideal. This is what you do when you're dealing with a crisis and you're trying to help somebody build back from the bottom.
Right.
You don't typically go from the bottom to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home. That's not typically what happens. You build from the bottom to something like this, where now you have something that you have a little bit of ownership in. You're not raising a family in it, but you have a little bit of ownership in it. You have a place where you can stay safe, you can stay warm, you can get clean, both physically, mentally, and help with addiction. You've got an area where there's responsibilities. You have responsibilities to help maintain this. There's rules, there's structure. It turns out we don't just hand you money and say, well, do whatever you want with it, because clearly your own decisions didn't get you into this position in the first place. You didn't just have enough access to resources and services. No, they say to be in this community, there are rules. You have to take responsibility for your actions and follow the rules. Because if you don't, guess what? Somebody else who does want to follow the rules, who does want to take responsibility for their own actions, who does want to improve their life, they can take your spot. Because it turns out that society is not to blame for the individual decisions of every human being. Society is not to blame for every bad thing that happens. Sometimes things happen and it just sucks. And that is when communities, and more specifically, families, come together to help one another. But what we have learned over and over and over again is that you can't replace a family with a government program. But there is no shortage of politicians that would love to try. Because the more dependent you are upon a government program, the more dependent you really are upon them. But you're growing up in a strong family, and when somebody in that family, or when somebody in that church group, or whatever, somebody in that friend group falls under hard times, and you gather around together and you help them out, and you make sure they don't go homeless, they don't go hungry, no politician gets to take credit for that. So they're not super invested in that being the reality. Oh, but they are super invested in being able to take credit for taking somebody else's stuff and giving it to somebody else in exchange for their vote. Or, in the case of what we're seeing in places like California, they are super happy to give millions upon millions, billions of dollars to the NGOs that they know support them and their reelection campaign, to just hand it off to them and essentially say, do your best, or whatever. We're not tracking anyway. Because it doesn't matter at election time when people are wondering, why is this homeless encampment outside of my elementary school? And they don't have time to actually dig into all of the reports and all of the studies in order to find out what's actually happening. That's fine. The governor of California can go to the same universities who are completely dependent on state funding that Governor Newsom gets to sign off on and say, I need a study, and I need the study to show the right things. You think that's a hard thing to do? You think that's a hard thing to do for the guy that signs the budget? This one must have slipped through the cracks because it actually revealed that they're not doing their job in tracking how the money is being spent or what the sort of results are. And yet you have this little community started by a pastor in a church and a ministry that has probably done far more with far less federal and state funding, with far more community investment in order to achieve something that attains results. And I guarantee you a 501c would look at something like this and be like, that's horrible. They don't even have a bathroom in their own house. That's horrible. They have to go to a community kitchen. They should be able to have their own. That's horrible. They don't have access to all the services we think they should. I don't know. This community seems to be working. Well, but we have a study that shows what they really need. I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't care what your studies show. I don't care what your experts say. I don't care what your politically connected 501c3s say. These guys seem to be doing something that actually works. And it's built around structure and accountability. And yes, charity, which is very, very different. The government does not engage in charity. The government engages in wealth redistribution. They take it from somebody that has earned it and they give it to somebody that did not. That's it. And that doesn't breed community, it breeds entitlement. How do we know? $10 billion later in California, and we're looking at a situation that's getting increasingly worse for everybody except the people that got a hold of the money first. So here's what I'm going to say. If we really want to address homelessness, wherever it might be, within our own communities, or looking at wider problems, it's probably not going to come from politicians coming up with 5 or 10-year plans in order to justify more federal spending that they can put into the hands of people that are ideologically aligned with them. And past that, we're not really concerned about the results. It's probably going to come from, first and foremost, preventing homelessness in the first place. And how do you do that? You typically do it with strong families. I'm sorry, there's not a lot of kids that leave from strong family homes. Not a lot. It happens. But first and foremost, that's the first guard against homelessness. Mom, dad, stay together, work hard, raise your kids, teach them to be responsible, to take ownership over their own lives. Now, at some point, they're going to make their own decisions, and they may make bad ones. And it may be time for parents to step back in and help them or bring them back in. They may run away from you, and they may need to hit rock bottom before they realize that they need to actually change courses. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot of politicians and an entire homelessness industry which benefit from them never learning that lesson. They benefit from them having this sense of entitlement that the reason why they're in the situation they are has nothing to do with their own decision making. It has everything to do with circumstances outside their control, and the only people that can help them are the politicians and the different organizations or government programs that have set up to help them. Now, look, I've met people that work in certain NGOs. I've met people that work in certain government programs that they are genuinely and truly passionate and they are trying to solve this problem. But one of the things that we're going to have to get to the bottom of is this. One of the things, the realizations we're going to have is this. Government spending within these organizations and government spending within these programs works off of some pretty bad perverse incentives that are incredibly difficult to overcome. There is no substitute for a family. There is no substitute. There is no perfect substitute for a family. There is no substitute from a community actually personally investing in this. And by a community, I don't mean your local city or your board of supervisors. I don't mean your public school system. I mean your friend network. I mean your church network. I mean the civic organizations that you might belong to, whether it's Ruritans or 4-H or FFA. It's people coming together, seeing somebody else in need and choosing to help them, either because they know what it's like or because they can empathize and they would want someone to be there for them. A lot of times I hear people say, what about the people that don't have anybody? I got to ask the question. I know there's certain circumstances where somebody, especially sometimes young people, where they genuinely don't have anybody. But you got to wonder, is it fair to ask the question, how do you go through your whole life ending up with absolutely nobody if you didn't alienate any of them? Is that a fair question to ask? If I found myself in a situation with no family, no friends, nobody that was willing to help me, I would ask the question, is there something I can do different? Is there something I can do better? Now you might say, what about the people dealing with mental health issues? They don't even have the capacity to make that decision. Are they unworthy of help? No, they need to be helped. But the question should still be asked, were there choices that were made to lead to those mental health issues? Because if we're not willing to ask those tough questions, if we think it's mean to ask those questions, here's a question: how do we prevent future people from making the same decisions? If we're unwilling to connect the bad results to bad decisions, how do we help other people avoid it? How do we empower people that are willing to actually make changes in their life if we're never willing to tell them, if you did this a little bit different, you might get a different result? There is nothing compassionate about enabling people to continue to make bad decisions which hurt them, their families, and their communities. I don't mean tough love in some sort of brutal sense, but sometimes tough love is letting people finally come to the realization that the good news is they can change their circumstances. It may be slow, it may be difficult, but here's what I've also noticed. The people that are willing to take responsibility for their actions and start down that journey, even if it's just a small step, usually always find people that are willing to come alongside them and help them in some capacity. So maybe the biggest problem is that there's a lot of money to be made in lying to people. It seems like more and more of our politics are built upon it. And one of the things that I think is going to demonstrate more than anything else how to cure homelessness is people raising strong families and then coming together for people in difficult circumstances and times, and actually being willing to personally sacrifice, and for the people receiving help to understand exactly what that sacrifice means. Because again, it may not be homelessness, but I know what it is to have my power turned off, and I know what it is to have somebody step in and help me, and the absolute gratitude I felt. See, some people would tell me that I shouldn't feel bad about that. No, I should feel bad about that. I should feel bad that I made bad decisions that led to my power being turned off, because that's ultimately what it was. Was I making a lot of money? No. Tina and I were barely getting by, and we were actually trying to help another family out at that time. But we still could have made better decisions. I still could have made better decisions. And when somebody stepped in and helped me, man, I felt it. I felt it. I felt bad about the decisions I made. I felt love and gratitude toward the people that were willing to help me in those circumstances. And what it caused me to do was make better decisions going forward. And it also caused me to want to reciprocate, to help other people when they were in those situations as well. Not to alleviate them from the understanding of what got them there, but to let them know that they were loved and to help them show there was a better way. All right. Kind of a weighty issue, but I hope we made a good argument. I hope we made a good argument on why this is happening in certain places, why it's worse in some places than it is in others. I hope we also showed you that a lot of the policies that are not necessarily directly related to this are actually causing the problem to be exacerbated. I hope we also showed that a lot of the NGOs that are coming out there, not all of them, but a lot of NGOs that are coming out there and saying, no. The problem is that we just don't have enough of the government programs. Well, when the government program or when the government policy or the regulation or the tax is actually increasing the problem, you should look really, really hard at the organizations that seem to look right past that and insist more of the same, because it could be that they're profiting off of the problem and therefore they don't have a great incentive to actually solve it. But I think we also showed that there is this organization, Mobile Loaves and Fishes, among many others, that are doing some really good work. And maybe it doesn't look like the ideal that we would all want at the finish line, but in order to get the finish line, you got to start somewhere. And these people seem to have started in a location. In fact, this isn't even the starting point for them. They started off with a food truck, but they've advanced past that and they're showing people a better way. And those people are certainly grateful for it. And that's what I see in a lot of this. I don't see a sense of entitlement. I see gratitude. And if there is one thing that is missing from our society right now, along with accountability and responsibility, it's gratitude. It is amazing what a grateful person can accomplish. I don't see much coming from entitled people. So let's work on increasing the gratitude component of this. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next episode.